All right. Well, welcome back.
Hello.
We've moved to a more comfortable location for us, hopefully. And I don't know. We try not to make this any kind of like formalized presentation of anything. We've been basically spending, well, before we had our first child, like probably 2 to 3 hours every evening sitting on the couch, taking apart everything we can get our hands on and then trying to put it back together again and make sense of
Looking
it.
at it really closely first.
Sometimes way too closely. And then so we've actually for a long time talked about recording it because sometimes you have great conversations and you go, man,
Yeah.
wish we'd have remembered that.
And there's always tea involved.
Yeah. It's hot.
Yeah.
All right. So what should we talk about?
Well, thank you everyone who did interact with last
Yeah, it was
last
awesome.
show, whatever it was. We had several people send us questions and things they were excited for us to cover. So let's see. I know that some people are excited for us to dive into our roles as masculine and feminine. That is definitely something we want to dive into. I'm not sure that today feels like the right day for that. What do you think?
It's almost like it's just so big,
I know,
like,
I know.
and it's also, man, it gets to be such touchy territory.
I feel like we need to lay a little more groundwork before we dive into that one.
I think
Yeah.
it's almost as if I feel I would rather the dynamics of masculine and feminine and how we understand them and what they've come to mean for us. Like, I would rather it almost just be in the background as a question. And then we attempt to embody those roles as we actually talk about other things.
Yeah, I was thinking about just embodying it too. Okay.
Yeah, because it's almost impossible to talk about. I mean, you could talk about it all day, but
yeah,
it's one of those things that there's, as soon as you say something about it, you have to say something else.
Yeah. Then it's touchy, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll save that one. Kind of sprinkle it in.
Yes, that's great. It's just kind of in the background.
Yeah. What else was there? I know we touched last time on talking about kind of the roles that animals have played and nature.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that we're both passionate about. We also talked about our reintegration from New Zealand, coming back to SoCal. We mentioned going over, what else?
I don't know what I talked about. It was maybe masculine and feminine even.
Yeah.
That I talked about.
Yeah.
Just fighting us off the whole thing. Well, so one of the things that we've talked about a little bit before we started this was just that one of the things that we've both been wrestling with for a long time now and might be a common thread that we can weave between a lot of these things is the notion of surrender. And like, we have a 4-month-old baby, so
lots of surrender.
Yeah. First baby is like, it's like a tidal wave of surrender.
I mean, yeah, it's like death to self, right? Like, death of self.
So maybe we can talk about, well, how about we start this way? Like, what is, when we came back from New Zealand, or maybe even before we went to New Zealand, what would you have thought about surrender then?
Oh, wow.
And then how did that like inform your notion of surrender?
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, the first thing that popped up in my mind is the story about the rock that I found.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I'd really thought of surrender before. I don't think it had been a big theme in my life.
Yeah.
But I remember going to New Zealand with a lot of baggage, emotional baggage.
Yeah.
And it was just like something that I felt like, oh, I just have to carry this. This is mine to be carried, and like just keep packing it on, right? I didn't know you could surrender these things. So anyway, like all this baggage, and I just kind of found it as part of my identity. I don't even remember when that was. It was one of our first weeks, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't know.
In New Zealand for the program, we went down to the beach and we all took time. We broke off individually and we all took time to just be quiet and reflect. by ourselves.
Yes, and let
Yeah.
me just situate a context a little bit.
Yes.
This is our junior year of college.
Mhm.
The first semester, we're studying abroad in New Zealand with a almost not fully off the grid, but like almost off the grid kind of community centered education around the idea of creation care and what does it mean to care for creation, and especially from a community mindset. So we all lived in the same house with the staff and the students. I guess the staff didn't actually live in the house. They lived in like the houses, but on the same property.
Yeah.
But like we were all part of the same community functioning. So that's the setting that this takes place in.
Yeah. Well, and no, thank you for backing up. That's a really good point. And before that, you and I had both grown up in like families that like to spend time outside, right? That was kind of growing up. It was like, oh yeah, spend time outside. But it wasn't like I really knew anything about creation care or anything like that. And then we both moved to Southern California and we went to college there. And there's very little nature there.
Yeah.
So
hard.
that was hard.
Yeah, I didn't really know anything about composting or, I think mostly what I knew about creation care and caring for the environment was very like, I don't know, rudimentary.
Just like recycle.
Yeah.
That's like all I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you for that context. That's very helpful.
So anyway.
So yeah, we'd gone down there. We were down there for a few weeks in the program. I think the program itself was a rude awakening for a lot of us. We thought it would be like more luxurious than it was, maybe. And it was so cold.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Crazy.
Like I remember sleeping.
No centralized heat.
Yeah. It was, and I remember sleeping with like 3 hot water bottles in 2 sleeping bags in clothes one of the nights. And you're just laying there like, what did I get myself into?
Yeah. Yeah. And from August in Colorado and Oregon.
It's warm.
To August in New Zealand, and it was just wet and rainy and cold.
Yeah.
Like we drank a lot. That's when we started drinking tea.
That is.
Yeah. We started drinking a lot of tea there.
Yeah.
Like, all the time. That was the only way you stayed warm.
Yeah. Warm your core. So yeah, it was just like a completely different world. And so anyway, we were doing this activity, and I think that was one of the only times I've really spent time like in contemplation by myself, being quiet and still. Yeah. And I was just sitting there, and I don't remember what exactly I was unpacking in my mind. And I just looked down, and it was like a rock beach. And I looked down, and there was a rock, and I grabbed it, I picked it up, and I turned it over for some reason, and it had the word goodbye written on the bottom of it. Like, no idea where that came from or anything. It just like the word goodbye written in a black Sharpie. And I was like, what in the world? And of course, I was like, oh man, I wish it said something else. Like, what is that supposed to mean? I was like, goodbye. And so I like looked at it for a while, and I was like, okay. And I said it on the dock, and I was like, either someone else can find this or I'll come back for it tomorrow. I didn't really feel like it was mine to take. And the more that I experienced through our time in New Zealand and the things that I was able to unpack in regards to surrender, like began in that moment. When I found this rock, it said goodbye. And I was like, okay, well, that must mean something. I found this, like, even though I wanted it to say something else, like this must mean something. And because I believe that nothing's coincidence, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that was like the real starting point of my experience in New Zealand surrendering. And for me, it was very much surrendering my identity.
Yeah. And that's almost like, so it almost sounds like that was surrender in general for you. Didn't really come alive until that moment.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I didn't even know that about you.
Yeah.
No.
In fact.
So, and also like, it's crazy to think about that. And again, this isn't anybody's fault, but it's like you hadn't really had an intentionally contemplative moment.
Oh yeah.
Before you were 20 years old, were we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were 21, 20 at that point. Yeah, because we turned 21 then.
Yeah.
That's just a comment. But
I don't think I ever sat still either.
Yeah. And then so you had all this baggage, and then you find this rock that has the word goodbye on it. Which who knows why it was there, but it was there. And so what is what did the goodbye, like, where did that take you as an idea, the notion of goodbye?
I think that was the first time in my life that I realized life and growth come from death. And I had always been this model of a person growing up, right? Like, and I had my identity, and everyone knew me for that, and I was like locked in. And then I go to New Zealand, and the combination of carrying all that baggage and the completely different world, like everything got turned on its head, and I was like, one, this is not who I want to be, and two, well then who am I?
Oh yeah.
You know, and like, who do I want to be? And so I think it was like an invitation to surrender that old identity of myself and that baggage that I was carrying. It was like a fresh start. Like, don't you feel like New Zealand was kind of a fresh start?
Yeah. I just like, I mean, wow, this is crazy because like obviously we've talked about this story and I know this story well, but like I don't know that I ever realized that it was that that deeply powerful of a moment for you.
Yeah.
Like I knew it was a big moment for you, but I thought it more had to do with just like it didn't strike me as being this deep until right now, which is so cool. Okay, so
one thing I just want to add that adds to the depth of the story is growing up, one of the metaphors that I used to use was that God would like not throw rocks at us because that sounds very aggressive, but like, hey, here's a little like,
oh yeah,
pay attention, right? A little tidbit.
Like you have a little boat and God like throws a rock on the other side to push you this way a little bit or something.
Well, like, but they're good things. He just wants your attention, right? And then we have a habit of putting up umbrellas and we're like, no, I don't want these things, right? Like, don't remind me of these things. And so the fact that I found a rock too, and that had been a metaphor that I'd grown up with, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, of course.
So anyway, I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah. Oh no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But okay, so you like at this moment, so this is a question. How much of like what was the experience of that like? Like what was the like did it happen? Did it like kind of hit you when you actually like picked up the rock and were looking at it, or was it in reflection that this has come out more? Or was there like what did it feel like to experience this sense of like, oh no, the identity that I've had is kind of crushing me, maybe? Tell me if this is an accurate read, but I don't, because I don't want to impose this.
Yeah.
It's like like your identity beforehand was like too tight for you or something, and and you reach this moment where all of a sudden you realized it was actually yours to change and do something with.
I think realizing agency, like that I have agency in my own life. Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Well, I mean, that's a huge deal to realize. Like, it's like almost the NPC, the NPC to non-NPC. That's a big like.
It's the day it started to crack, but
it's 20 years old.
Yeah. Sorry. I mean, if only could happen to all of us when we're 8, right, or sooner, but I think every day that I get further from it, the more I'm able to realize like what a big moment that was. And I'm glad that popped up when you said surrender, because like I haven't tied that together before. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's when I first learned what surrender, how good surrender could feel too. Like, but what a big difference it can make.
Yeah. Okay. And what did that? Oh, go ahead.
No, I just feel like I've been talking. I want to hear your story.
Oh no, let's just finish this. This is great. Okay. We're just using your story as the thing to look at surrender for. Okay. Unless you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, no.
Well, because I was just thinking, like, it's so interesting that because it seems like in the modern world, it wouldn't make sense to people that the moment you realize you have agency in your life, that's the thing that defined that moment for you, but you tie that moment to surrender. Like most people think that to surrender is to lose agency. So that's a crazy thing that we just tied together there.
Yeah.
Like, so what is happening in surrender if it was So what was surrender like for you in that moment, such that it brought you more agency?
Hmm. I'm not sure that surrender always feels good. We're making it sound like it feels good.
Yeah.
um, because you do realize that like you sometimes have no, yeah, you always have the choice to surrender,
Hmm.
right?
Before we put it into action, maybe we need to fill out more of what it is,
Sure.
because
Sure.
I tried to put it into action. I don't know what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
still confusing.
Um, that you have the choice to surrender, and by doing so, you can become a better version of yourself.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that it feels good or that it's easy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, it's not like it's not still death,
Yeah, yes.
right?
Yes.
Like it very and usually, right? If you think of it just in terms of like the most basic form of surrender, which is like, okay, two armies fighting, one surrenders because they lose, right? And I think that's like pretty much the first thing that comes up probably for a lot of us, and probably some of us get stuck there at being, that's what surrender means. It means to lose. It means to lose on the field of conflict. And that doesn't sound to me like what you're saying.
Yeah.
So the question is maybe like, what are you surrendering?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you could say if the surrender is on the field of conflict, maybe it's that you're surrendering, you're giving up the cause that you were fighting for. Because in some sense, if you're in a conflict, you're fighting for something.
Or the things you are holding so tightly to, which I mean that fits in there too. Like you're holding tightly to how you feel the outcome should be.
Yeah, yeah.
So
what were you surrendering?
I think in that case, I was surrendering who I thought I was, or that I could know. No, that didn't come till later. That I could know who I thought I was.
Hey, let me take two huge steps right on one.
We weren't there yet.
Yeah. As judging by the rest of who I was in college.
Oh man.
Although I don't know if I learned this lesson in New Zealand. I don't. Yeah.
We love those versions of ourselves.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it was really realizing that that part of myself had to die. That's like the best way that I can think to say that.
And also that it wasn't actually who you were, maybe.
Yeah, and that I could put that to rest. Like I had the opportunity to be like, I don't want to be that anymore.
Yeah.
How can I be a better version of myself?
Was it suffering that got you there? Like, what was it that made you realize that you didn't want that version of yourself?
Well, sure. Yeah, I was suffering because I was carrying all this weight. Quite oppressive. Yeah. I mean, yeah. And I'm trying to think about how to describe what that surrendering would entail or feel like. When you release an identity or baggage, what you're just being okay with what was and you're moving forward with what could be.
Yeah, I mean, this gets complicated. Well, it gets complicated. Okay, here's where my mind went. My mind was like, I opened up the whole path of reintegration and then forgiveness and all that other stuff. But because we brought in like, we love those past versions of ourselves, right? So that but in the moment, you don't like, surrender is like the first step. You don't get to forgiveness and all that stuff till way later. So it's not like you have to have forgiveness to surrender.
Yeah.
Surrender is like the point at which you're like, well, basically what it sounds like you're saying is like, okay, here's who I was that you like built up and you had it, you're like holding on to it, and the pressure was getting so much. And then the surrender was actually the act of being like, okay, I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Not only can I not do this, but like I don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did that feel like in your body when that
Oh
happened?
my gosh. I remember I just cried and I went.
It was like a huge release.
Oh yeah, and we weren't supposed to take long showers, remember? We were supposed to conserve hot water.
Yeah.
And I remember I just needed like to feel hot water and I just cried and like let everything out, like released that built up like just the blockages in my body, in my physical body, but also just emotionally letting all that.
It's
and
like so much
processing
energy
it
that
too.
you've been holding back,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And I remember the day after that happened, I walked out and I had several people be like, wow, you look so light today. Or like, wow, you look like you're glowing. And I was like, wow, I feel good. Like, okay, that was validation.
Yeah.
Like, okay, something has changed. But
then
I think, I mean, that's the first time I personally recall a version of myself dying. But I think once you learn how to do that and you're on the other side of it, it's easier to do that again. Because that's what life is full of, right? Like there's past versions of yourselves that are always dying.
Yeah.
And it's very beneficial to get good at putting them to death. Like,
yeah.
And being okay with it.
Yeah.
To me, that's what comes to mind with surrender. But
no, yeah. I guess here's what I'm thinking about is like, okay, if you have your past versions of yourself that you love and also your past versions of yourself that are dying, it's almost like I want to differentiate those terms because I think they're both legitimate. Like the one is legitimate in terms of the past self that you loved or that you love, which is just how does this work? Because they're the same, right? The past self that has to die is also the same. It's like it has to die in the sense that it's no longer the lens that I'm looking through, right? So like, I don't know, I'll pick something where like in college where I did something dumb. I'll just pick that version of myself. And I'm like, that version of myself is so cringy to me, right? I look back on several things in college. I'm like, oh, but I want to like love that version of myself.
Yeah.
But in order to love that version of myself, I have to surrender. I have to like surrender to it. I have to surrender to the fact that I was that.
Yes.
Because that's maybe what it is. Because if the past version of yourself hasn't been put to death, then it's something you're actively like fighting.
Oh yeah, and you're like, oh, I didn't do that, or that wasn't me. You know,
right.
It's not integrated.
Yeah, or you're trying to pull them with you.
Oh
right? If it's an identity, you pull it with you.
Yeah.
I'm still a baseball player.
Yes.
God, I did that for so long.
Hey.
Anyway.
We did that.
Yeah, but like now I can look back and love that version of myself to some degree on some days, to the degree that I'm like have allowed it to die such that it can be reborn in a sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, rebirth is crucial in that.
Yeah, it's not
process.
like it's not like they just die and go away.
And you're just like cutting it off and you're getting smaller.
Yeah,
and smaller.
that's
it's like you're pruning back so that it can flourish more.
Yeah, that's super important. I think it's like if you're trying to process trauma by just like leaving it in the past. That's not a wise choice, I don't think.
Yeah.
Okay.
A word that came up when you were talking there is acceptance. Is acceptance also surrender, or is it part of surrender?
It's funny because there's so many levels to surrender. Like I always want to start at the level of, the very reluctant loser, right? But there's a much different level of surrender when like you're actually surrendering willingly to something, right? You're actually and so it seems like on that more superficial level that it's not a it's not a surrender. It's not a surrender. an acceptance. It's like a reluctant acceptance or
Mm.
something,
Mm.
right? Or a forced acceptance even.
Mm.
But then on a much deeper layer, it's like it's like a giving up to, right? It's an allowance of what is, and even an embrasure of what is. Because I mean, even when like, not to get too personal, but like when you move into like sex, it's like there's a surrender that happens willingly that allows the thing to become way more than it is
absolutely.
otherwise.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I don't know. It is acceptance, it seems like, but maybe.
And like giving of self, giving over of self.
Yeah, because surrender, again, it has something to do with agency, right? There's a, and this is why it's so interesting. Okay. We're getting a little too fine grained.
I know. I I'm gonna pull back reality
Yeah.
because I have a question.
Looking a little too close there.
This is what we do. We look really close.
Pull it out like really close.
Yep.
Back.
Put it back. So when it comes,
Jump back to the narrative.
That made surrender sound good.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it feels good, and it does when you're on the other side of it.
The release.
But I want you to maybe tell about when we came back to California.
Yeah.
After we lived in like heaven on earth and got to be hippies living out of a van and just have the most freedom. And then we came back to Southern California. We were back in a normal college program where we had to sit in a classroom and desks and listen to lectures, right? And there was hardly any nature to be found. There's the concrete jungle. So that integration process was hard.
Yeah.
That was hard for both of us. What did surrender look like in that case for you?
Oh, gosh. It took quite a while till there was some of it. Well, it's so strange, right? Because I actually spent a lot of the time in New Zealand struggling, surrendering to what it was. Because like I was a pretty, I don't know, I had enough trauma and stuff that I wanted to check out a lot. So I remember I had like a MVP baseball 2004 on my laptop, and I would like just sit in my room and play that game.
I
like,
remember.
Not all the time, but there were definitely days where I was like, because I couldn't deal with it to some degree. Like I wasn't used to living in community like that with people. It was a lot.
But we didn't even have internet.
Like, yeah, there was no contact.
Were we supposed to have laptops?
Yeah, but only to write papers.
Yeah.
I mean, I definitely was a challenge for that program, but I'm so grateful for it because over the time, it wore a lot of those rough edges off of me. So I was more, maybe this is why I think of surrender as more reluctantly, because I've been a fairly reluctant surrenderer for most of my life. Because you always surrender more. Like you never win.
Yeah.
You can't win against life. You can't win ever.
Well, it's worse to try. Like
what's that?
It's worse to try to win. Like just go with it.
Yeah. We all surrender ultimately, period, right? Like everybody dies. So there's no getting out of it. So that's right. That's the good question is, are you surrendering actively or are you surrendering reluctantly?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, because like, that's interesting because so at the beginning of New Zealand, you had an experience where it was like, okay, active surrender. You had this kind of like metanoia turning about moment.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. I had a lot of like more of a grading thing, and like we had to wash our clothes by hand. That was hard for me. We definitely were only supposed to ride bikes, and we bought a car.
We lived off of lentils.
Yeah.
No, not just lentils and like breads and stuff. Couldn't eat the chicken eggs though, I remember.
Oh, you had a horrible like restricted diet.
Yeah, we're making this sound bad, but like it was incredibly helpful, really.
Well, yeah, and this is why, like, because it was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard, and I think for me being in New Zealand, I didn't know it at the time, but I learned a ton about surrender there because, and also I learned that it wasn't a bad thing. Like I was, slowly being forced out of my shell, mostly self-imposed shell. I didn't know it at the time. I thought it was somebody else's fault. But that's always how it is. And it wasn't until much later that I realized it cognitively, but I knew it was beneficial for me over the time. And so, yeah, it's interesting. But so when we came back, like it was, oh man, the culture shock. I can remember the first time I walked into a mall.
Oh,
Oh, man.
wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Because it was like even the nearest town was 4,000 people, 3,000 people. And a lot of it was like, hey, here are all the issues with consumerism and just foregrounded marketplace capitalism, and everything boils down to money and things, and it's like, oh, all right. And so we'd come so far out of that. And then I come back to Southern California, and people just everybody's quite invested in the clothes they're wearing and their haircut and whatever else. But the biggest issue is like we had been so cut off, and I was so excited to like come back, and like I thought people would be so excited to see us, and some people were, right?
Yeah,
like our real good friends were.
Yes.
But there were a lot of those people that maybe this was more me than you. Those first 2 years at Biola, I was like more a part of just like a broad community. So I thought all those people that were like second and third tier friends would be like super excited to see me and all this stuff. And like a lot of people like, oh, you weren't here? And so that that was the hardest part, is like people that like you found out who your friends were.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I think by that point in college you start to anyway, but
yeah.
That was coming back during
hard.
that time was also a really big part of that transition. And coming back second semester. In pregnancy.
You're a mom now. And we know you're a mom.
Yeah. Busted. Second semester.
Yeah.
Because everyone's kind of gotten in the groove of that year, and then it's even more of a shock. What did that feel like in your body when you came back and you realized like this is where I am for the foreseeable future?
I just felt lonely. Like, thank God you were there. I mean, and that was amazing, because we were just on the front end of a relationship. Like, we were all excited, and it probably kept us going, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have stayed, honestly.
And all of our friends were excited too. I feel like they'd all seen it coming. And
that's true. We were
finally
friends
together. Yeah. And so
if I brought that scope, yeah. But I think the biggest surrender for me was there's this temptation when you kind of have your frames broken, right? These places that you were stuck in, and whether willingly or unwillingly, you've been forced to surrender them, and you see like a brighter view of the world. There's a temptation to like become a missionary for that.
Ooh.
Especially when you go back to the people that were like that haven't had that experience, right? And it's where you were before, and like, oh man, you don't know what you're doing here. And so for me, that's the surrender of coming home, was a surrender to other people. Because I remember, I don't know who it was that told me this. It might have been, I think it was you, from a podcast or something. And it was maybe 2 or 3 months after we got back, and it was something like, if you're telling somebody that they're going over a cliff, and they are going over a cliff, and they don't listen to you, the right thing to do is to let them go over the cliff. So no, that's not right. That's not right.
I was like, I don't call this.
It's like a vague thing, but I don't know how to get it out.
That's okay.
Anyway.
Yeah.
But the sense was just because I see something that other people are doing that seems not to be helpful for them, there's a surrender that is the letting go of a sense that I need to be the one to turn their life around. And it's like the surrender of the messianic complex, you might say.
Yeah, sure. And you expect that because you've changed so much that other people have changed so much, and then you realize that other people haven't gone through a life-changing experience in the same way in 6 months. And it's just, I guess, an acceptance of like, okay, That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's hard at first. You're like, oh, all this crazy stuff happened. You're like, oh, you just didn't really like change in this season that much. So yeah, I think that was a big, for me, like the people we were surrounded with, which is like, oh, I think our close friends were
Yeah.
different and
I
would listen, and like
Yeah.
were more invested.
Yeah.
But it's just the general
Yeah.
population that we were
Yeah, I
surrounded
would put a
by.
caveat, like all of our friends from Biola are absolutely wonderful. Like,
Yeah.
and they were, I mean, especially those that were really close to us were indispensable to get through that. I mean, goodness.
And our friends from New Zealand.
Yeah.
We all were going through the same thing. I
Yeah.
remember, and I would Skype them, and that was so nice to have a core group of people that understood
Yeah.
that integrating back into the real world is just tricky.
It's so hard to talk about the kind of way that you wrestle through your life without like making some, you like have to set up these things where it was like me versus these people. And it's like, it's so hard to do it. I wish there was a way to do it without using any kind of language that disparages the other people. Are like, oh, they're, but it's so hard to do that. So yeah, it's not like anybody at Biola is a bad person or like
we're better than anyone. That's
no, exactly.
It's just we're all having different experiences.
Yeah.
I want to. I'm sure we have surrendered many times since then, whether willingly or reluctantly. But I would like to talk about, as you mentioned at the beginning, surrendering to parenthood.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, man. Wow. I'm so grateful that I had befriended surrender before we became parents. Like, I mean, this isn't new ground for us to cover exactly. I don't think we've ever talked about it quite, to this depth, maybe in particular, but we've like you said, we've done a lot of conscious work about trying to surrender parts of ourselves in the last several years. And I think that was so helpful when Amber came along, because it was like, if I didn't have that, it was so hard. There was a while there where it was so hard because I enjoyed our life so much before she got here.
Yeah. And
I mean, she's unbelievably wonderful, but just the responsibility of having that and the recognition that it never goes back, like that can be crushing. Yeah. And that
you are responsible, or you will love this person for the rest of forever.
Yeah.
It is no small thing.
Yeah, and you have to surrender so much control, so much
identity.
Yeah.
Especially as a woman, your body, your whole identity from maiden to mother.
Yeah,
shifts.
Yeah, I feel like I've surrendered a few things, but like, my goodness,
they just look different. I think you also surrender the part of ourselves that got to be kids.
Yeah,
just pretty much do whatever we wanted when we wanted, like traveling wise. Just did a lot of fun stuff. We still do. Because we're very intentional about that. But it's definitely a speed bump along the way.
It's just different.
It is different.
But I think talking about it, that you don't get to be kids anymore is, I mean, it's not like you can't have fun like you're a kid anymore, but it's that distinction of, and this hit me hard, was you go from being someone that received life, and therefore just your understanding of life is that you receive it. And then when you become a parent, your understanding of life shifts to really being a conduit, right? I received life, but now I've also given and continue to give life.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
And there's a lot of surrender in that, right? Because you're you're turning it around.
Your posture.
Yeah. You're giving it away.
Yeah.
And you're surrendering to the flow of life through you, like all of that.
Yes. I like that image.
And I'm sure you probably feel that so much more than I do, because it's much more obvious that she has flown into the world.
Yeah, that is true.
Via you.
That is true. That does take some surrender, yes.
Yeah, so what was that like?
Birth itself as surrender, or
Oh,
what do you mean?
yeah. Pick up you.
Well, I think pregnancy, the whole experience of pregnancy, was an invitation to surrender, to release, to accept. You know, just like I said, that shift from maiden to mother is huge. When you've lived your whole life as, you know, the maiden, and more, I guess, desirable, right? Like in our culture. And then you go through this huge transition, you have to surrender that identity. Like, it's not a choice.
Yeah.
You can choose how gracefully you're going to do it. And I wasn't sure that I ever wanted to be a mother too. So that was a big thing I had to work through of, do I even want this identity? And then as it happened, and as I continued to let those pieces of myself come to the forefront and be put to death so they could be replaced by new growth, it came to the place where I love being a mother. I love it. And I'm so surprised by that. It's the dream I never knew I had. And it's not easy to surrender. I feel like it's a daily practice. Any mom, I think, will tell you that. I'm very new to this. And I think pregnancy, it's nice that it's that long because you get to practice surrender over and over and over, right? And like, if you're sick, you have to, like, your body is helping you, like, physically surrender as you go.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, it's been so fun to see you become a mom. You're so good at it. It's amazing.
Thank you.
It is.
Couldn't do it without you.
From one thing, and we've talked about this a lot, but one thing that was really just when you talked about feeling it in your body, and your body will draw you into that surrender. It's so interesting because I talk a lot about relevance realization, right? Because I'm a disciple of John Vervaeke, and the shift in your relevance realization, your salience landscape, right? What was obviously valuable to you in your attention shifted so dramatically. It was around, like, I don't know, 8 weeks maybe of pregnancy.
Yeah.
Because up until then, like I said at the beginning of this video, like, these kind of conversations were constant.
Yeah.
Like, that's all we did. And then it was like, you couldn't be bothered. Like,
I had to know about birth. Like, that's all I could do.
Yeah, it was crazy.
It was like mental nesting. I was like, I need to know what comes next.
Yeah. And it was just like your whole attention landscape just shifted.
Yeah. Yes.
And it almost, I mean, whether it was a forced surrender or not, it like, at that point, it's primordial. Like, you don't even, it's primordial to your agency. You just.
And it was frustrating to both of us because I couldn't play at the level you were still playing at, and I wanted to, and I, like, mentally couldn't. I was full and I was just exhausted.
Yeah.
The whole mom brain thing, like, I thought that wasn't real, but
yeah,
it very much is. And so I think, yeah, that was definitely hard for us to both surrender to that part.
Yeah, that was a meta surrender. Still is.
Still is.
That's an ongoing meta surrender. Because it's like, to have a child means you have a point in reality where your attention is always constrained.
Yes.
Your attention is always constrained to this point in reality. And it's, the strength of that varies on all the vectors, their age, how competent they seem to be, how trustworthy they are. Like, there's so many dynamics that shift your relevance realization in terms of how much you prioritize that point. But right now, when she's a baby, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And so,
well, when she was inside me and I was growing her, like, Yeah, that's a lot of attention.
Yeah. But it's
Yeah.
also like, it's funny because as new parents, there's so many things to negotiate
Mm,
all the time. So
yeah.
having your relevance realization, your attention's totally keyed in over here, but you have a lot more to negotiate. Well, it's keyed in over here. You have a lot more to negotiate here. That's unhandy.
Yeah.
That's quite unhandy because it's like it's so much more difficult to hear each other, I
Yes.
think.
Yes. Absolutely. And I don't know that we'd ever really experienced that. We kind of had at the beginning of our marriage when we both worked, but it was very different. I think
Yeah.
we were just in a very different place.
Yeah.
But
'Cause-
having to negotiate pretty much on the daily between us. And it's gotten easier, but I think that's been very new for us.
Yeah.
New territory.
Well, yeah, and then I mean to back out to what you brought up there, just communication and relationship in general, right? Like one of your most basic, I mean, it is your most basic fundamental of a relationship is how well do you communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there's anything that marks our entire relationship, it's been that we've probably emphasized that as our highest priority the whole time.
Yeah.
From the time we were friends to
Mhm.
now,
Mhm.
like I think we're almost constantly checking in on how well we're communicating.
Mhm. Communication is key.
Well, we should probably stop.
I know, I was feeling through. Does that feel complete for now?
Yeah, Mel, maybe
I know we could go on for a long time, but
you wanna,
now that you mentioned it, I'm thinking about our baby a lot.
yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know. Do you want to say anything about surrender to kind of tie it together? What feels like let's tie a bowstring
Yeah,
on this.
yeah. We touched on a lot of places.
Mhm.
I think I just want to reiterate that even though surrender is hard and uncomfortable and it is a putting to death of sorts, the more often you practice that and the better you get at it, it's always a good thing. It's always better on the other side, because it does make room for that new growth.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I never knew about surrender because like you were saying, it often feels like the person who's reluctant to lose.
Yeah.
And I think that's what surrender's taught me, that it's a really beautiful and necessary part of the journey.
Mhm. Yeah.
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 What about you?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I discovered so much with this conversation. That was awesome. Yeah. And this is part of why we wanted to do this is like, I mean, you're all welcome to be here, but
This is a nice date.
Yeah, yeah. And we get to actually like, it helps to have like I don't know, it helps to have some skin in the game sometimes in
Mhm.
terms of like something to be aware of
Mhm.
that like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, man, what to say about surrender? Yeah, the old parts of yourself were just one way to say it is all the false realities that you've created and are trying to carry with you through time.
Mhm.
It's a lot easier if you don't carry them.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's like surrender is the first like recognition that you actually don't have like
Mm.
you don't have to carry them.
The letting go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. That feels good.
All right. See you later.